Good evening, everyone.
Sorry, hopefully that's the end of the talk.
Startled. If I make any movement, it feels like I'm going to make a sound of some sort. I am Patricia Riley. I am a humanist. I live here in Holland. I'm a member of the Holland Interfaith Allies, and we welcome you here tonight. It's so exciting to be at these events because I know everyone is open-hearted and curious and really wants to get to know their neighbors. So we appreciate that you're here tonight. We wanted to acknowledge that this is our 5th Get to Know Your Neighbor. So we've Facebook Lived several of them, but not all of them. Our first one was at Hope College, Get to Know Your Muslim Neighbor. Our second one was in this room, Get to Know Your Nun Neighbor, those of us who are secular or atheist. The third one was Get to Know Your Hindu Neighbor, and just a few weeks ago, Get to Know Your Jewish Neighbor here in this place. So tonight we have the privilege to get to know our Baha'i neighbors and Zahabia.
Hi everyone, my name is Zahabia Ahmed Osmani, and I am a Muslim resident of Zealand, also part of the Holland Interfaith Allies Committee, and I work actually for the Kaufman Interfaith Institute at Grand Valley. Patricia and I will be your moderators for the evening. So once again, thank you all for being here at this event. Let's begin with a few thank yous. We would like to thank all of our collaborating organizations. These organizations are Hope Church, First Presbyterian Church of Holland, Holland UCC, Holland Area Arts Council, LEDA, the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, Kaufman Interfaith Institute, and of course our host for the evening, Herrick District Library. Without the support of these organizations, these events that we do would really not be possible. So we thank them for helping us with this, and we thank you all for being here again tonight. So thank you. So before we get started, I wanted to let you know this event will follow the same format as our previous events. So if our Baha'i neighbors will please join us on the stage while I go through the rest of this. Before I ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more, let me tell you a little bit more about the format for tonight. Patricia and I will begin by asking the panelists questions. And then after we've gone through the questions that we have for the panelists and get things rolling, you all will have the opportunity to participate in our conversation by submitting questions on the note cards that you were either given when you walked in. We have ushers that will pick them up, and if you need more note cards, feel free. Todd is modeling for us right now, demonstrating how he will come around and grab your note cards and give you more note cards, because we want this to be a dialogue and we want you all to feel like you're a part of this experience. So after that, the note cards will be collected, compiled in the back of the room, and sent to Patricia and I to pose to the panelists. Does that make sense? Awesome. All right, great. So, and there's just one more thing that we like to have as our disclaimer before we get things started, and that is, in order to respect each speaker, each of our panelists, we must understand that these folks do not represent the entirety of their tradition. All right, they are simply expressing their understanding, their individual understanding of the Baha'i faith as they experience it. All right, okay, great. Well, why don't we get started?
Good. So, we're excited to have the 4 of you on our panel, and why don't we start with you sharing who you are, where you live, some places that you connect in the community, and then we'll go a little deeper after that.
All right, I'll start it. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Bob Hamilton. I'm an attorney here in Holland. Live with my wife and Fran. We have 2 adult children who live in Grand Rapids. Am I doing that?
We're turning on.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I've been an attorney for 30 years, most of which has been with the law firm of Han Persinger, and the majority of my practice has been as a public defender doing indigent defense work for adults charged with crimes here in Ottawa County who can't afford attorneys. 2 months ago, I was hired by Ottawa County to be the public defender for Ottawa County and head up a brand new department that was created called the Office of the Public Defender. And so we're in the process of creating a brand new office in Ottawa County. As far as how I connect in the community, I connect with environmental groups, been involved environmentally for a long time. I connect with my local Baha'i groups, I connect with the legal community, I connect with my dog.
Thank you, Bob.
I'm David Douglas. I live in Granville, Michigan. Former resident of Holland, Michigan. Been a teacher, counselor for 36 years. Married to my wife of 28 years. Have 3 daughters and 3 grandsons. Yeah, so for most of my life I've been in the educational system and have just enjoyed, I have to say, being part of that educational community. When I retired, that was one of the things I missed, all the teachers who had become my friends. I connect now through, I love to have faith-based conversations with anybody, anywhere, at any time. Especially if we can do it in a way that is not rancorous or contentious. And maybe I should say only if we can do it in a way that's not rancorous or contentious. And yeah, I also have been part of a group, kind of an internet group, a base group that kind of connects with people in real life called Meetup. And my wife and I have been running a meetup group called Meaningful Conversations and Building Vibrant Communities. And that's one of the ways I've learned to meet people after my retirement.
Hi, I'm Annie Olson, 5th generation Dutch girl. And I live here with my husband Phil in the back. Golly, where do I start? And I'm seeing Carrie over there. Okay, one of the things I do is we have a called Pancakes Are Us, and we serve breakfast over at Western Seminary for about 150 people. And I gotta recognize Carrie and Yashu. Yashu has passed away, but Carrie was a part of the group that helped to get the Interfaith group that got Pancakes Are Us going. So Carrie and Yashu, us. So that kind of sums me up. But been about community. Growing up in Holland, I always ate for community. I didn't have any brothers and sisters, and all I had was nature. So that kind of got me going. Then I married an American Indian and went to Alaska and lived, and finally came back here with my half-breed kids, and got very involved in racial issues and interfaith issues. And nowadays, I do my art and doing a lot of writing on my strange journey.
I'm Katana Merkel, and I'm a 17-year-old recently graduated student who also just recently moved into the community of Ada. I don't have as much to say as all these people. I have I interact mostly with the community as I'm doing a period of service before going to college, so I'm focusing on children's classes and empowering the younger generations and things like that.
Thank you. Next question. How would you describe the Baha'i faith from your perspective?
Still without your mic.
Yeah, we're gonna, mine is off.
I'd probably describe it as a world-encompassing religion that's characterized by unity.
Speak with your mic up to your mouth.
Like so?
Yeah,
Describe what the Baha'i faith, how I describe it.
from your perspective.
That there's only one human family, and there's only one creation, so there's only one unknowable essence.
This will probably seem redundant. The Baha'i faith is a world faith whose purpose is to bring unity to the world. All of its principles are about unity, the oneness of God, the oneness of our human family, and the oneness of religion. All of the principles of the faith kind of support those three basic principles of unity.
I would sum up the faith by saying I think it's the salvation of all humanity in the entire planet.
Wow. Describe your spiritual journey and the path that brought you to the Baha'i faith.
Looks like we're bouncing back and forth here.
That's right.
Okay, so growing up, I would say was probably a fairly typical American middle class. We went to church on Sunday. I don't think God or Jesus was really particularly relevant in our lives, but we went to church on Sunday until my father became disenfranchised with church. And then we stopped going to church, which was fine with me because it just gave me more things that I could do that I wanted to do. So from the time I would say I was 8 years old till I got to college, I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about spiritual or religious things. I didn't really care, and I didn't want to care. So I would say I was sort of it wasn't a part of my conscious mindset. I got to college where people begin exploring and thinking about things. I would say during that point of my life, I became an agnostic, perhaps an atheist. As I look back on those times, I like to describe myself as an antagnostic, just because I'm generally antagonistic as a person. And so I very much enjoyed arguing with people about matters of religion. Didn't really think too much more about things until my wife and I moved back to Holland, where she was born and raised. I was raised over in mid-Michigan. Our children started being told by neighbor children that they were going to go to hell because they weren't Christian, or maybe it was because we trick-or-treated on Halloween or believed in Santa Claus. I'm not sure exactly what the motivating belief pattern was. I sort of shrugged it off, but it pissed my wife off. And so she re-engaged in the local churches. We started visiting various churches locally. We ended up finding the Fountain Street Church in Grand Rapids, where we went for about a year. That became a major commitment every Sunday, so it kind of fell off. We quit doing that. A good friend of ours, Katie Klosky, who's here, my wife was babysitting, and for Katie's daughter, who went to the same elementary school that our daughter went to, our kids went to. And she invited Fran and I to what's called a fireside, sort of a general informational meeting about the faith. My wife was very enthused about going. I went along out of intellectual curiosity, I suppose. And so we went to Katie's house. There was probably 18 people there, Baha'is and non-Baha'is. My wife became immediately attracted to the faith. She fell in love with it, with her heart, and believed in the fundamental teachings of the faith. I became intellectually attracted to the faith because I loved a lot of the very common sense practices of the faith. which we'll probably get into in a little bit, but we don't have paid clergy. We worship with people who live in our community, whether they're rich, poor, black, white, Latino, mentally ill. We all go to each other's houses and worship together and work through our struggles together, which is frankly a fairly challenging thing to do at times. The service to the faith or the leadership, depending on how you want to look to it, is elected. It's all democratically elected from within the community, all the way up to the governing agency, the Universal House of Justice. So my wife declared within a matter of months that she believed that Baha'u'llah was the manifestation of God for today. One of the things that Baha'is are supposed to do, if they can afford to do it, is take a pilgrimage to Haifa, Israel, which is the universal headquarters for the faith. Where the faith is organized. The Universal House of Justice is seated there. The archives are there. The research facilities are there. It's on the side of Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. So for my wife, it was a pilgrimage. For me, it was a disappointing vacation because I could think of thousands of places on the planet that I would rather go than Haifa, Israel. But even though I wasn't a Baha'i, I did participate in some of the pilgrimage activities. And I guess I'll just shortcut this and say, in the shrine of Baha'u'llah, I had a religious conversion. And for the first time in my life, I came to believe in God. That's my spiritual journey.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, one thing I have in common with Bob is a period of my life was spent in a state of agnosticism or atheism. My parents were, I don't know if I should say practicing or non-practicing atheists, in any case they were firmly committed to the unbelief in God. So they did not believe in God. And I was raised really in a very moral home. My mom was one of the most compassionate and loving, self-sacrificing people that I've ever known. And my father was her partner in that. But they really came from Christian families, both of them, and they had really become disaffected from the Christian faith because of the problems that they saw in the history of the history and practices of some of the religious hierarchies. The Crusades couldn't understand that. Inquisition couldn't understand that. Racism. My mother was white, my father black. Just saw the church riddled with racism, and so they just kind of threw the whole thing out. And they raised me and my brothers and sisters to believe whatever we wanted to believe. So we were free to visit churches with our friends. We had discussions about God and his existence or her existence or non-existence, and pretty much I remained agnostic until I was about 20 years old.
David, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think people can't hear, so we just really want to hold that mic really
Okay.
close to your mouth. Yeah.
Hold it more.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I
is
think
that
that's
better?
There
Thank
we
you
go.
so
I
much.
just want
I
people
won't
to hear
repeat
your
the-
story.
I won't
Yes.
repeat the whole story, so.
Thank you.
But when I was roughly, I'm going to say 19 years old, I was really looking for social solutions to some of the problems of the world. I was looking to, how do we get rid of racism? How do we how do we reform a capitalistic system that really oppresses some people and gives other people unfair advantages? How do we bring about the equality of women and men? I mean, how do we get rid of injustice? And I was not seeing any of the people or any of the institutions or organizations around me addressing all those problems in any kind of meaningful way, except in certain isolated instances. So I saw Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement as a very positive step in the right direction. You know, I looked at one of his inspiring role models, Mahatma Gandhi, and saw what he had been able to do. And then I looked at the fact that both of those folks believed in God. And so I thought, well, perhaps they know something that I don't. And at that time, I decided to take a journey of faith, to just act on faith and look for guidance and search for what I regarded to be spiritual truth. I explored various religious groups and people, organized, disorganized. I talked to gurus, the followers of gurus. I went to Catholic churches, Protestant churches. I read the Bible. I took a course on Hinduism. I did everything I could to find out what I regarded to be, you know, the spiritual truth, and discovered largely that the basic spiritual principles of all of these folks in these different religions and different denominations were the same. That there's one God, that we all pray. There's fasting in all of the religions. The idea of sacrifice and charity are in common to all of the religions. And so I came to the fundamental belief that, you know, religions were basically talking about the same thing, and people were basically worshiping the same God, even though they often would describe that God in different terms and different ways. And at that point, I ran across the Baha'i faith, and I remember my first encounter with Baha'is, where I saw posters that espoused the independent investigation of truth, the equality of women and men, the common foundation of all religions, spiritual solutions to economic problems, and I was immediately attracted. Now, what does that mean? I wanted to know more about the Baha'i faith, so I asked the person that I was talking to, a student, what do Baha'is do? And he talked about service and worship and fasting, and then he mentioned feasts, Baha'i feasts, and I said, what are those? And he said, oh, we get together and we eat. I was in college at the time. You might describe me as a starving college student. And we have fellowship, and then we talk about business. And I said, oh, that sounds good. Can I come? He says, well, you know, they're really for Baha'is. And I said, well, what do you have to do to become a Baha'i? And he said, well, you just have to say you're a Baha'i. So I said, I'm a Baha'i. And he about fell over backwards, of course. And I'll cut the story short at that point. But at that time, in my mind, I said, well, I'm going to investigate this faith. And if it sounds like something I like, I'm going to stick with it. If not, I'm just going to leave it behind. And I've been with the faith, since 1971. Have not looked backwards, have found a source of joy and contentment and happiness, and most of all, a connection between, I'm going to say, you know, spiritual practices and the solutions to the problems of the world, large and small.
Where to start?
I think you're also going to have to hand
Okay.
it over really close.
Can you hear me? Okay. Well, I was born in Detroit during the Second World War and came back here right after the war with my mom and dad, and this is where my mom grew up. And I had a grandma that escaped here and went to Chicago at the 1900. And she was a domestic down there, and she came back changed. She was very cosmopolitan. And that influenced my mother and I a lot. And so for me, I was an only child of an only child. And so nature became my first way of kind of knowing Mother Nature and Father Creator. And really, to me, it was really nature that nurtured me. And that was really where my first spirituality began. I wasn't in the church. We had a nominal relationship with the Methodist Church, which was fine. But I didn't have any idea of who God was or what Jesus meant or anything. But I was here as out in nature, and that became so much a part of me. And Also, I had the geographic. My grandpa made sure I saw. So here's his only kid, only child, and here's all these kids in the geographic of all different shades, and I was playing with them. I just couldn't get in the magazine. So, but that really influenced me a lot. And then I learned to fly at 16, and that was a very spiritual experience for me because I was able to get so high and look down in Holland, and I was seeing all the churches getting along. Now, if you grew up here in the 40s and 50s, you were aware of a lot of the divisions. And I'll tell you, I didn't know it at the time, but that was something that meant a lot to me, to seeing Hollanders getting along. Because I love people getting along. I was shy like I am right now, but I love seeing people getting along. I hated people arguing. And so that year I met a man who I thought was Japanese, who turned out to be a full-blooded Indian from Alaska. And he was at the airport, we met, and I was exotic to him because I was a girl flying. And he was exotic to me, and we got married and went to Alaska to live with his people. So I'm very indigenous in my thinking. Tlingit is the tribe that I married into and adopted, so you're seeing a very red and white person here. So a lot I wanted to thank the Great Mystery for bringing us all here together. So at that point, my husband was still in the church. He was preaching, a lay preacher, but I didn't understand anything about God yet. And then we ended up in Washington, D.C. In the 70s. We're living there. And I got involved with the prayer breakfast movement. A lot of the people that were converting Chuck Colson. And through that and reading the Bible, I finally became a Christian by reading the Bible. And I realized it's all about everybody getting along. And I didn't know Jesus said he was going to come back again. And it was like, you grew up in Holland, you didn't know that? But it happens. But, you know, here's God saying that he's going to come back again and make everything right. And I just wondered, and wipe all the tears away from my eyes. I thought it was wonderful. So I became a very evangelical Christian for maybe 25 years. Moved back here in 1980, got a divorce, and brought my 3 half-breed kids back here. And that's when the racism for my children started. And it was difficult. But I still stayed in the church. And then in '87, I had an epiphany of where it was like really touching our history, what we've really done. Now you gotta imagine, I was somebody who married into the Indian culture and was very involved in Indian affairs. I knew all the history, but I knew it all up here. I finally connected with it here, and when I did, it woke me up. Now there's a passage in the Baha'i faith that says something, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. And with it, you'll be able to see with your own eyes. And that's what happened to me. It made me really start to see and ask the same questions your parents did about the things the church wasn't talking about. And I'm not talking about Christianity, but more what the church wasn't seeing. So that part of me, I finally had to leave the church. And I left my evangelical part. And in those 11 years, I was really spiritually alone. And you can imagine, if I'd been in the church a long time, I was lonely. And it was a very lonely experience. But within that experience, I came to conclusions. And one was that there was only one earth and only one universe. There's only one unknowable essence, the Great Mystery. And that search also helped me to understand it was about men and women working together and about fairness and science and religion getting along. Oh, yeah. And then to fast forward to how I met the Baha'i faith, well, you know, with my kids, the Baha'is were having this race unity picnic every year. Well, I never managed to make it, and one year I called up and I talked with my husband, Phil, who wasn't my husband yet. And he said, well, why didn't you come to the Race Unity picnic? Well, I'd been a little confused. I didn't go at 1 o'clock. I went at 4 o'clock when it was closing. And the first person I met was David and his 2 daughters. And his 2 daughters were making Indian bows and arrows. So it was as if the Great Spirit wanted me to know more about the Baha'i faith. That's why, David, I have this, because it was so touching for the Indian part of me that you were doing that, and your daughters. So independent investigation is a big part of the Baha'i faith, and in fact, that's paramount. So I investigated. Is this really true? It sounded way too good to be true. Here's this faith. I came to all these conclusions. Here's this faith teaching this. And it just amazed me because I realized all the faiths were coming from the same source. I'd read the verse in the Bible about the everlasting gospel being preached by an angel that says, trust the one that made all things, the Indian way of describing the Creator. And eventually in November 4th of 1998, I became a Baha'i. And for me, it's been an answer to what things are. Thank you for letting me share.
Again, mine's going to be a little bit shorter. I used to say I was born into the Baha'i faith. I'm 4th generation. And it's an interesting question to ask me to describe my journey in Baha'i faith, because to me, Baha'i faith hasn't really been like this religion. Like, I have my life, and then I also have religion. To me, being a Baha'i has always been kind of more of a lifestyle, and it feels difficult to separate the 2 pieces. I really don't know how to expound on that, because to me, I am a Baha'i. When I reached the 15, which is the age of spiritual maturity, when in the Baha'i faith, when you're seen to be responsible for your own soul and your own spiritual progress, I chose, like, yeah, I'm definitely going to be a Baha'i, because I haven't had a reason to ever separate, like, this life of being Baha'i and it as a religion. Does that make sense?
So Tony, you can start with this next question. A lot of you, can everyone hear me? Okay. A lot of you spoke about the unity of humanity when you initially described the Baha'i faith. And what we'd like you to do is to share maybe a core practice, belief, or value that's important to you in the Baha'i faith.
A core value that's kind of personally important to me is the idea of individual investigation of the truth. In the Baha'i faith, we're not only allowed, we're also encouraged to go and seek our own answers and our own gleanings from the writing. We're not just expected to blindly follow what we're being told, but if we see something, we are implored to go forward and find answers for why, and find answers. Of course, there's this thing of faith in which you are still supposed to believe, but you also are to not just ignorantly believe.
One of the things that's one of the things that's most special for me is unity and diversity. I guess in part because that's who I am. I'm Caucasian by birth and for the first 19 years of my life, but most of my life was lived native. And so it really challenged me to get those 2 parts of me that obviously in our country are very much in opposition. So sometimes when I write poetry, I sign it as Pink Eagle, the red and white in me getting along. So unity and diversity is very dear to me.
So the thing that I found most compelling about the faith was actually the way that all of the teachings actually are really perfectly, in my eyes, address the problems and the needs of the world right now, today. That is, all the teachings are designed to bring unity to the human race and how we get along with each other. One particularly, I think, interesting and important aspect of that is actually the Baha'i kind of marriage practices. The actual Baha'i marriage vow is, we will all verily abide by the will of God. So naturally, husband and wife love each other. Naturally, they want to exist in harmony together. But the essence is service to humankind. So the Baha'i marriage is actually not just a commitment to each other. It's a commitment to, you know, humanity and God and the universe. And so that actually brings a really strong spiritual core to Baha'i marriages, which I really think is profoundly beautiful.
Sometimes in the legal profession, it's hard to find intrinsic rewards in what we do. Sometimes in the legal profession, it's hard to find intrinsic rewards for what we do. There's a fundamental principle within the faith that says that work performed in the spirit of service to humanity is equivalent to worship. And so sometimes on stressful days or days where I'm wondering what it is I'm doing, arguing with everybody that I see, from my clients to the prosecutors to the judges, I'm able to reflect a little bit and say, in my job, I'm performing service to humanity. And in my job, I am worshiping God.
So, can those of you that would like to share, tell us your understanding of God in the Baha'i faith?
My understanding of God is that God is an unknowable essence. God has no gender. God has no form. That we are no more capable of understanding God, our Creator, than this stainless steel bottle is of understanding the person who created it. God is an essence, and as soon as we try to define that essence, it loses its essence.
Nevertheless, one of the basic teachings of the Baha'i faith is that we are created to know and love God. So I agree with everything that Bob has said. At the same time, I think there's a kind of what might seem to be a paradox. How can we know the unknowable? And I think the answer to that is in the journey. Part of the answer to that is that the founders of the major religions have given us some kind of pathway or doorway to understand God and in our quest to know God. And Baha'u'llah, the most recent prophet, as Baha'i see it, has really said that these manifestations or prophets of God reflect the attributes of God. So Christ told us that God is love. Christ demonstrated infinite love, and so we know that one aspect of our Creator is that our Creator is loving. Right? All of the prophets say that God is the Creator, so we know that one of the attributes of God is creativity, or the Creator of the universe. And we could take that with justice and mercy and other attributes of God, which we're taught by these manifestation of God, that they reflect in some small measure some basic kind of attributes or characteristics of God, although God is an unknowable essence and beyond any of our comprehensions.
I came across a wonderful quote in a dictionary. I'm a dictionary person, I'm a quote keeper, etc. But it was about the difference between thinking and believing and knowing. And knowing was about firsthand. And sometimes when we use the word knowing, it doesn't mean firsthand knowledge. So we don't have a real firsthand knowledge of God who's made us. But I think that we've been given the ability, especially through each one of us. I've often thought about it with people from all different faiths. The more we get back to the very core of each one of our faiths, maybe that's where, when we start to talk together, we're kind of all touching that proverbial elephant in different places. And if we could learn to maybe take off the blindfolds and see the elephant together, we each have different parts that we're intimate with by touching. And then we can start to fill in the blanks. So each one of us maybe have a part of the puzzle to know God, but it's only when we talk together are we really going to be able to flesh out that total understanding of the Creator, and especially not just knowing, but how to make this world work. I get back to an old movie. I don't know how many of you remember Oh God, the movie. A few of you. But the point of the movie was that the Creator gave us everything we need to make this world work. It's an old movie that maybe the message needs to come back. And that's kind of what I think the Interfaith Institute is all about.
Anything that I say at this point would be redundant. Like, the fact that there is one God would probably be the only thing that I could really talk about, that all the religions under every name really is the same God. Going back to your proverbial elephant, we're all touching the same elephant.
So Katana, I'm going to ask you a question. What are some of your favorite memories of your tradition as a Baha'i, whether cultural or religious?
Favorite memory would probably have to be celebrating a Yamiha with my friends, families, and community. A Yamiha are the kind of days outside of time. So the Baha'i calendar has these 19 months with 19 days, and there are these days that don't quite fit into there. And on those days, our family, we would just basically partake in days and days of service. So it would be before the fast, so we would make these fast baskets for everyone in our community. We would chocolate dip strawberries and deliver them to people. We do meals on wheels. We plant flowers with all the other children in our neighborhood. Yeah, those are probably my favorite memories.
Well, one would be going on pilgrimage to Haifa and seeing the World Center and the gardens. If you get a chance, go online and look at the Baha'i gardens in Haifa. It blows your mind away. But the other thing for me at practice is finding a passage. I'll end up coming across a passage that really has a lot of meaning to me. And for the next, until I find another one, I read that one over and over again and ponder it and ponder it. And it seems to, I end up going deeper and deeper of understanding.
Don't feel awkward. Yeah. No, go ahead.
Oh, I keep passing
So-
the wrong one.
That's okay.
Take ours back. This is the group.
So, one of the things that I think I've really learned through the Baha'i faith is actually prayer. I mean, growing up in an atheist family, I didn't practice prayer, but the practice of daily prayer really has enriched my life immensely. One of the teachings is that the most blessed condition that man can be in is to be in a state of prayer. And of course, this is confirmed in all the religions, that we should actually strive to live in a state of prayer. And so, not that I know even what that looks like, but to have that as a goal and to have that as something that I try to do every time I can remember has really changed the way that I approach my day-to-day living, and it really has immensely enriched my life.
I don't have anything.
Okay. I just want to remind everyone to submit your questions on note cards. Todd is coming back around to grab those, so if you have any, we'd love to hear from you. We're just going to ask a few more questions and then hopefully hear from you all what your questions are. Okay, so you mentioned kind of that all of the previous faiths are kind of pointing to the same one God. But can you share a little bit about some of the distinct differences between the Baha'i faith, Baha'i religion from other monotheistic religions?
Well, I'll start out with a few, and I'm sure there's more than I can come up with, but the ones I previously mentioned is we don't have paid clergy. We have an abundance of writings, we have study guides, but ultimately it's up to us individually to study the writings and figure out how those writings fit into our individual lives and practices. Some communities that are large have Baha'i centers or perhaps even houses of worship, but most Baha'i communities, particularly in Holland, for instance, we worship in our homes. So we have the 19-day feasts that were mentioned earlier, which would be the equivalent, I suppose, of a Sunday service for us. And we hold those in each other's houses, and they rotate from house to house, and writings are prepared by whoever is hosting, or sometimes somebody else brings them, and then those form the basis of the spiritual discussion and teachings for the day. Those would be two that come to my mind right away.
So the seeds of this particular teaching exist in other religions, but they haven't been as fully elaborated as they are in the Baha'i faith, and that is the elimination of prejudice, all forms of prejudice from our hearts. The elimination of racial prejudice, economic prejudice, educational prejudice, political prejudice, gender prejudice, that we have to take it as a spiritual obligation to search in our hearts and eliminate all traces of those prejudices. This particular teaching, I think, is, as it's expounded, is unique and one of the unique needs and challenges of this age. If we look at any of the world's problems, you can see that most of them have their roots in some form of prejudice.
Do you want to end? Or you have another one?
I forgot to say something.
Say it, or just say
That, frankly, I think is probably the one most defining feature of the Baha'i faith from all other religions. And the reason, because I asked that question once when I was investigating, and it's referred to as the covenant. So Baha'u'llah, who is the founder of the Baha'i faith, when he died, he left a will and testament. And in that will and testament, he said, from now on, upon my death, you will all turn to one of his grandsons, Abdul-Baha. He was a son, to interpret the teachings, to interpret the faith. When Abdul-Baha died, he left a will and testament saying that you will turn to Shoghi Effendi, his grandson, to be the interpreter, the head of the faith. Shoghi Effendi died without issue. He had no children. But Baha'u'llah foresaw that, And he said, should this covenant, this progression, this passing on of the faith, should there be no issue, progeny, then he created the universal house of justice. He said the universal house of justice will be formed, and then this will be the guiding agency for the Baha'i faith. And so one of the problems that plagues religion and always has plagued religion is almost from the get-go, almost from the death of the founder of the faith, it begins to divide into schisms. And Baha'u'llah prevented that by creating this covenant, the way that faith would be passed down. And if it wasn't passed down directly through his family, then he created this agency, the administrative order, that now administers the affairs of the faith. And Baha'is, from whatever country you are from, we all turn to the universal house of justice for guidance. There is only one head. I like to think of it as an agency of service. There's only one head of the faith that we turn to for authoritative guidance on what the writings mean.
Thank you. We're going to turn now to some of the audience questions, which are very interesting. Marriage was obviously a very powerful expression, because we have a question that asks for some clarification. If marriage is not just a commitment to one another, but to God and service and the universe, what are the implications of divorce in the Baha'i faith? How are marriages performed without a clergy? Because that's a very interesting difference. And who handles those kinds of administrative affairs? You want to start?
Sure. I almost want to yield to Katana, though, not about marriage, but I know she had something to say on the other subject. No? Okay.
It's all right.
Okay, that question had 3 parts. Okay, and the first question was, part of the question was?
If marriage is not just a commitment to one another, but God and the universe, what is the implication of divorce?
Okay, so divorce is very clearly discouraged, but at the same time, it's allowed. So the ideal is for Baha'i partners to stay married throughout eternity. But Baha'u'llah said that if animosity and enmity develop to the point that there's disunity, then marriage is allowed to dissolve. Divorce is allowed, provided that the couple separate for 1 year and try for that entire year to overcome the problems of disunity and seek counseling actually to overcome those problems of disunity. But if they're not able to overcome those differences, they are allowed to divorce. I, in fact, was married for 12 years and then went through a divorce, which was, I have to say, really the most horrible experience in my entire life. Really, it meant the end of the ideal of the continuation of that marriage, as well as a lot of deep soul searching about what was my contribution to the end of that marriage. And so I do think that actually prepared me for my second marriage, which was vastly more successful. So that's the first part of the question.
And the second one is both specific and general. So without a clergy, how do you handle administrative affairs, including things like performing a marriage?
So there is an administrative order, and every Baha'i community of sufficient size elects a local spiritual assembly. The local spiritual assembly then handles the affairs of the faith, marriages, dealing with issues of death, counseling through divorces, granting a Baha'i divorce in addition to a civil divorce. So there is an administrative agency within the faith that's performed not by any individual, but by an assembly elected by the members of that community. So the marriage licenses, for instance, would be signed by the secretary of the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Holland.
Thank you. That was really clear. Katan, does Baha'i have a creation story or myth or an end of days story?
Not that I can think of. I might have to yield to one of the others if they have an answer on that. I haven't heard of one.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oh, well, yeah, there's, one of the tenets of the faith is this agreement between science and religion. So, I guess for a creation myth, one would look towards science and know that there is a harmony between them. Actually, it's a fascinating thing where, I'm very science driven, but it's a fascinating thing where there's, if you put all of the years of the existence of the universe on a calendar, the first 7 days would actually follow the 7 days of creation that you would find in the Bible. And so you see this harmony between science and religion, but it's nothing strictly Baha'i, if that makes sense.
Another question, what do you believe happens after death?
Ooh.
Eternity?
So,
Lots of things.
lots of things.
So that's a great question. Baha'u'llah talks about the many worlds or lives that we will encounter after death. But he also describes that we don't understand what that's going to look like. And one of the things I love about the writings is how it uses nature and biology to describe spiritual things. So one of the descriptions of our understanding of death is just as a fetus in utero doesn't understand what this life that it's being born into is about. We do not understand what the next life that we will be born into is about. But what we do in this life can strengthen us and help us to progress in the next worlds. So when God gives us teachings like daily prayer, like fast, like studying the readings that strengthen our souls, those are all things that will help us progress in the next world and the worlds to come after that. Just like a healthy diet by a mother will help the baby growing in her womb to have good eyes and good hearing and good mind. So there is definitely a life after this one. It sounds like there's many worlds after this one. What they look like is, I don't know, and there might be some descriptions out there that I'm not aware of, but what this life is doing is preparing us for, or what we should be doing in this life, I should say, is preparing ourselves, using this time to prepare ourselves for the next lives.
Though it is said that like we're not going to have these same physical eyes and these same physical ears, so the preparing that we're doing for our next lives and gaining these virtues of compassion and respect and tact and things like that are all going to act as our ears and our mouths and our sense of touch. When I was younger, I always had described it as if we don't develop these things, they're going to be a rock in the next world. Though that's not a literal rock, but we won't have the ability to do things just like a rock doesn't have ability to do things here. I would always say I don't want to be a rock in the next world.
So we have a couple of questions that relate to each other. I'll ask them both and you can figure out what you want to do with them. What is an example of the Baha'i approach to solving or addressing a contemporary social problem? You mentioned that. And the one that could fit within that category, does Baha'i endorse any particular political, economic, social position?
So we're Baha'is, but we're also individuals. So the Baha'i faith as a whole does not, but each person in their own, as their own individual, can endorse what they choose to endorse, well, understanding that they are always acting as a representative of the Baha'i faith, because they are.
Well, we were talking earlier to someone in the audience that we don't get involved in politics because it's, at least in our country, it's very divisive. So each one of us finds different ways to give our expression of involvement. I'm very involved in science and from my background very much writing about climate change, but not getting into the political part of it, much more broadly. So you wouldn't talk directly about one person, but you talk much more broadly. So the involvement that Baha'is get in all different things is much broader, so it doesn't target somebody.
So one of the really attractive elements to me of what's happening in the Baha'i community worldwide is the way that its approach to community development. And so in more than 5,000 localities, there are groups of people whose purpose is to learn about the empowering populations to take charge of their spiritual and material destinies. And within that, there are programs for children, for middle school kids, for high schoolers, and adults that are aimed at empowerment and empowering people to take charge of their lives. And I really do have a particular fondness for this because it's not a top-down approach, and it's not telling people what to do. It's not like that many of the common social services programs where we, provide for people. It's helping people to establish the mental, spiritual, and physical habits as individuals and as community members that will help them to solve their problems, their community's problems, and eventually the problems of the world.
On a very practical level, we are instructed to consort with the followers of all religions, all believers in God. It's an affirmative teaching in our faith that we are to associate with people of other religions, which you don't have to look very far to realize how much fear-driven activity there is to keep people of different faiths apart from each other. So if we continue to have meetings like this and talk to each other and focus on our similarities rather than what are really very minor differences in our belief structures, so many of the world's problems will go away. Baha'is are prohibited from holding partisan office if it's a political partisan office. So I couldn't run for state senate or president of the United States and be true to the teachings of the faith. If it was a nonpartisan position, somebody could run for that, like judges, things like that, but they're really partisan these days anyway, so. But, you know, and the substance of that is we should really be focusing on our spiritual development and our spiritual similarities and spiritual solutions to material problems, to economic problems, rather than relying on partisan politics to try to fix the things that it will never fix, because that's just part of that process, is to keep them broken.
Just a quick thing to say is that you mentioned the partisan politics things a couple times, and that's not to say like we don't vote on matters of that stuff as well, because we are instructed to follow the laws of our nation still. We just don't go and say like what part, you don't pick a part, like you don't vote purely because of party reasons, or you don't align yourself purely with a party or things like that.
Thank you. So I'm going to shift the tone for a minute, and one of the questions is, do you sing songs? Do you sing in the Baha'i faith?
Yes.
Do you want to sing one for us?
Sure.
We heard a rumor that you actually do sing. So, yeah.
I usually sing with my sister, but all right.
She's here.
My God, my adored one, my King, my desire. My God, my adored one, my King, my desire. What tongue can voice my thanks to thee? I was heedless, thou didst awaken me. I was as one dead, thou didst quicken me with the water of life.
Wow, that's a first for our interfaith gathering. Ask us questions regularly. Thank you, that was beautiful. We'll shift back to the other kinds of questions. Just curious if there are any challenges generally for Baha'is living in American communities. So some of you live in Holland, some of Ada, Grand Rapids. Have you had any challenges with the community around you, although you deeply pray for unity? Have there been any challenges?
I would say that, so when I moved to Holland, I was not a Baha'i, and I didn't become Baha'i for many years after I moved to Holland. I can't say that since I've declared myself to be a Baha'i and a follower of believer in Baha'u'llah, that I've faced any additional challenges. I've just found Holland to always be a challenging community for an outsider to come into, you know, and it's just the way it is. But I haven't noticed any particular differences since I declared it myself.
So not related to you being a Baha'i, but
just related to
generally
me
challenging.
not being born, raised here, going to the right church, not being Dutch. The list, and I think the list, I don't even know all the things on the list.
All right, anybody else?
Well, the the girl I grew up with, she's about 2.5 years older than I. And she was all excited when I became a Christian. And then when I moved back here, you know, it was good. You know, she was so happy, you know. And then when I left the church and then eventually became a Baha'i, she just, you know, she was an evangelical Christian, she still is. We just don't have any communication at all. You know, that's sad.
Thank you.
Like I said, I only recently moved to the Grand Rapids kind of area, but in general, like when you're the Grand Rapids community in general has been really great, really open, really accepting, really wanting to learn more. But I mean, like in the past, I've always sometimes run into like a xenophobia because you're talking about these what people see are like naive and idealistic, like unity or agreement between science and religion, or things that they see like, oh, you're such an optimist, but like you can go ahead and believe that, but you have to be realistic. But Grand Rapids community is overall really great. They're really willing to hear more and to actually engage in discussion.
That's good news. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, a clarification on my friend. I think maybe the disappointment was that she didn't want to know more. She didn't really want to find out what it was all about. Yeah, and I think that brings me to an understanding too. We've been talking about all of these principles. I think it's really important to realize all of these principles were given, and they began in 1844 in Persia. And they're real popular now. My husband was talking about it today. You're going to be preaching to the choir on unity and diversity. And then he got to realize, we together realized, you know, back in Persia in 1844 and when Baha'i declared, these were not popular things about women and men and about all of these things. So sometimes we don't ask the question, maybe there really is an unknowable essence and he really did teach these principles and have them come through the Baha'i faith in 1844. We're talking about them right now, and maybe this is all really real. And like I said to you about at the beginning about thinking and believing and knowing, this dictionary difference, I deeply think the faith is true. I think these things are, that's why I don't put belief on it as much as I really think they're true, with a deep, investigative knowing. So, for lack of using a word I probably shouldn't use.
So we're going to ask one more question, and this question I have a personal interest in because being involved in interfaith work, I've learned that the monotheistic faiths, you share lots of prophets, and one of the prophets you all share is Jesus. And so one of the questions is, what do you believe about Jesus? Who was he? Who is he in your belief system? Go for it.
So, I'm going to say pretty much the same thing that Bob said about God, that Jesus and the station of Jesus is really beyond our comprehension. However, there's certain things that we can and do know about Jesus. Baha'is look at Jesus as a manifestation of God. God we can't see. God is invisible. God makes himself obvious and seeable through the prophets of God, and Jesus is one of these prophets or manifestations of God. He perfectly reflected the knowledge of God, the will of God, and the attributes of God. And so that's the sense and that's the station of Jesus. we think of Jesus as being a perfect mirror. You know, man was created in God's image, not physically, but spiritually. And so Jesus perfectly reflected all of the attributes of God. We do not limit this station to Jesus. We think that the founders of the major religions were all manifestations of God and all perfectly reflected the attributes of God in the same manner that Jesus did. And so we do think that the Spirit of Jesus, sometimes maybe called the Holy Spirit, is the same spirit of the other founders of the world's religions. That's actually one of the unique teachings of the Baha'i faith, which really has the power to bring people of all faiths together in unity, even if they don't join, say, the Baha'i faith or any other faith. The acknowledgement of that can help us to get along with each other.
And on that note, which is such a unifying note, we want to thank you for this.
Thank you all once again for sharing so deeply who you are and about your journeys and about your experiences living in this community and just sharing yourselves with us tonight. Thank you so much. And your beautiful song, Katana. Thank you. We do want to inform you before you leave about what's coming next. We have our next Holland Interfaith Allies event, which will be an interfaith community gathering on February 12th. And it's going to be from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in this very room. The event will be a time and place for people to connect over sweet and savory small bites, and all community members are welcome to attend that. So we have these panels where we hear from people. Now we get to really just interact and get to know each other. So we invite you to join us for that event. The next event that we're going to do is going to be on April 9th. It's going to be another panel, but it's going to be different. It's going to be getting to know some interfaith couples. So the Holland Interfaith Allies are going to do that on April 9th. More information to come on that. Well, we have the information right there. That. And then next we have on Saturday, January 26th from 7 to 9 p.m., the film Same God is showing at the Knickerbocker Theater. And this documentary explores the story of Dr. Larisha Hawkins, a political science professor at Wheaton College's decision to stand in solidarity with Muslim people, and she put on a hijab, and she posted on her social media that we worship the same God. And Wheaton College then proceeded to terminate her employment, and the film really explores intersections of theological questions, race, gender issues. So it's really wonderful and interesting. I hope you will come check that out. I believe Dr. Hawkins and another subject of the film will be present for a panel discussion afterwards. And finally, if we don't have a slide for it, on February 20th, Kaufman Interfaith Institute is having our next Abrahamic dinner, and the theme is going to be listening to young adult leaders. We don't exactly know location and stuff yet. It got moved up, so stay tuned to, St. Nick's, awesome. We got confirmation today about St. Nick's. And the theme will be listening to young adult leaders, and there will be dinner. So I hope you will attend that annual event. Oh, sorry. And also, Grand Haven is having, a lot of people come to our events, and this is the next Lakeshore Interfaith at the Bridges event, which is an interfaith group meeting in Grand Haven. It's an interfaith potluck at the Spring Lake Library on January 24th. So please join us for that as well if you're interested. Thank you all so much for being here. Drive safe, everyone. Thank you.